Have you ever seen a slasher movie? There's always a crazy killer running around, there's always the pretty girl who dies first, and there's always a lot of jump scares, gore, and death.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula!
And over the years, the standard hasn't really changed. We've seen it in Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, and others. Every slasher movie has a simple pattern that it follows. That was the exact problem when the first Scream movie hit theaters in 1996. By that point, slasher movies had been so overdone that no one really cared about them anymore. The thing that made Scream so different was that it was a satirical comedy that still managed to scare people. All four Scream movies consistently make fun of the stereotypes of slasher films. The characters bring up all the things horror movie characters are not supposed to do.
Oh, you can't act. He's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
And then proceed to do them anyway. Other unusual factors were the subtle yet blatant references to other films.
You call me? Huh? Not your friend.
And cameo performances from pop culture that wasn't even horror related.
I lied.
It's uncanny.
I was up for Princess Leia.
I was this close.
All of this was unusual for a horror movie at the time, and some believe that these movies actually saved the slasher genre from extinction. So where did the Scream franchise come from? Actually, it came from a much darker, much scarier story. The story of Danny Rolling, also known as the Gainesville Ripper. Rolling was a serial killer who operated in the early 90s, and he is the inspiration for the Scream movies. You're probably thinking that he wore a mask, or that he was mad at some teenage girl for something she had no control over. Actually, that's not what happened. The stories of Scream and Danny Rolling aren't actually that similar. The details that they share are small and specific, but first, who was Rolling and why does he matter? Danny Rolling's entire life was troubling from the start. He was abused by his father as early as 1 year old, and he tried to cope with this and other issues in negative ways. He started out with petty crimes and thefts, and his problem behaviors increased over the years. He finally snapped in May of 1990. He broke into his father's home, shot, and nearly killed him. After that, Rolling ran away and hid in the woods near the University of Florida. This was the birth of the Gainesville Ripper. Over the course of 3 days, Rolling broke into the homes of 5 college students and killed them. Rolling continued to steal from stores and homes for another 2 weeks after the murders. Finally, police arrested Rolling for trying to rob a Winn-Dixie store outside Ocala, Florida. After running DNA tests, the police were able to link Rolling to the 5 Gainesville murders, plus 3 more murders that took place in his hometown. Rolling confessed to the murders and he was executed in 2006. Okay, so why was that important? After all, Danny Rolling didn't do anything comical or satirical. He never wore a mask, and he certainly did not look like this. First off, it's important to remember that Scream was not based on a true story. It was only inspired by one. This means that Kevin Williamson, the screenwriter inspired by Rolling's story, took an idea and changed it into something of his own. So, how similar are the stories of Scream and Danny Rolling? Not very. The similarities are there, but you would have to be really paying attention to spot them in most cases. The most obvious similarity is the way Ghostface acts. Kevin Williamson imagined a killer coming after him with a knife the first time he saw Rolling. Similarly, Ghostface is a knife-wielding killer who breaks into homes, kills people, and damages property in the process. That was Rolling's method in every one of his murders, and that's what most people will notice first if they know both stories. However, that is not the only similarity. While they were searching for the Gainesville Ripper, the police first suspected a man named Edward Lee Humphrey. Prone to violent tendencies and obsessed with one of Rolling's victims, Humphrey was the perfect suspect. It wasn't until after Rolling's arrest that police realized Humphrey wasn't actually the killer. Like Humphrey, the character Cotton Weary is mistakenly accused and nearly executed for the murder of the character Maureen Prescott. Rolling was, of course, actually executed for his crimes in real life, and Cotton is depicted as emotionally unstable even after he is proven innocent.
It's Diane Sawyer. Hello. Whoa. It's quite a predicament you're in, Sid.
Those are all the similarities. Unless you want to get technical and talk about how both our universe and the Scream universe took tragic events and turned them into a source of entertainment. Yes, they did go that far in breaking the fourth wall. All that being said, there are clearly more differences than similarities in the stories of Scream and Danny Rolling. As I said, Rolling never wore a mask for anything, not even his last robbery before he was arrested. Ghostface, of course, wears the iconic mask that anybody would recognize if they saw it, whether they liked horror movies or not. The entire costume is obviously a huge pop culture reference in our world, and it eventually becomes a pop culture reference in the Scream universe as well. This is a reference to the Stab films that exist within the Scream films.
Stab 2? We want to do that. Sequel to suck.
Another difference between the two was that Rolling's motive was never entirely clear. All we know for sure was that he had a psychotic breakdown, but he never had anything specific against his victims. No matter who Ghostface was, he or she was always mad at Sidney Prescott for something.
Mine's just good old-fashioned revenge. You killed my son.
How do you think people become famous anymore?
Yet another difference is that Rowling was only one person. He was fairly easy to catch, and his killing spree only lasted a few days. Ghostface is, of course, completely different. He or she is the classic slasher villain. The difference is that Ghostface purposely breaks the rules of slasher movies.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
There's no evidence that Danny Rowling really thought about scary movies at all. The details of his murders didn't really match that of the slasher films of the time, and his actions were more likely influenced by his own anger. While Rowling was only one man, there were a total of 7 different killers spanned across all 4 movies.
Surprise, Sydney.
Most of the movies had a main killer who worked with a sidekick, like Billy and Stu. The only one where Ghostface worked alone was Scream 3. Danny Rowling never worked with anyone helping him, so Scream 3 actually had the most accurate Ghostface to date. Unless there was only one killer in the show. I didn't bother to watch that because Ghostface looks like this. The last difference is the time frame of each story. Danny Rowling's murder spree thankfully only lasted a few days, and his arrest happened shortly after. For one thing, no Ghostface was ever successfully arrested. Every killer dies in their respective movie, usually killed by the main protagonist. Rowling was executed about 10 years after the first Scream movie came out, and he served a prison sentence up to that point. Each individual killing spree in each individual movie only lasted a few days, just like Rowling's. However, the entire time span of the Scream series goes from 1996 to 2011. The last film installment left room for more content, but Wes Craven, the director of all 4 movies, unfortunately died before a 5th movie was even brought up. If more movies had been made, they could have potentially explored Rowling's story a bit more. Each existing movie has some kind of reference to what actually happened in real life. But in the end, that's all they are, references. The main focus of these films was to poke fun at scary movies. This drastic change of pace paved the way for more satires of the horror genre, including a spoof of Scream itself.
Lose the cape, it's way too 90s horror.
Despite the fact that Scream is tame compared to a good amount of other horror films, the story of Danny Rowling is obviously not a satire of anything, and it is much scarier than these movies. The harsh reality of what happened is almost completely glossed over in the franchise that came from it. Although the similarities that connect the two are present, they are few and far between. The point of the Scream franchise is to be entertaining, not historical. So Scream stayed entertaining and funny, and cut out all of Rowling's story except for certain details. That being said, the story still would have never gotten as far as it did without Danny Rowling. He was the reason for Kevin Williamson's first big success as a writer. All the t-shirts, Halloween decorations, costumes, and expensive memorabilia wouldn't have existed, and the slasher genre could have been dead by now. That is what makes Rowling's story so important in pop culture, not the measure of how similar the two stories are.